What's same old stuff, different day.
Right. Absolutely. At least now I don't feel alone.
No.
Before it was just me.
No, it's happened to me. I think it's either you or me all the time.
Right.
Okay. So this is going to get, there's a lot of names. So where possible, I'm going to kind of remind you, because I made notes of who these people are, since, there's time delays in how we present the information. But for those of you who are following along in this book, just know that I don't go through every single detail. But this chapter, we're on chapter 4, does start, and we'll get into a little bit of chapter 5 tonight, does start to tie it to Gladio in some very interesting ways. So, right off the bat, chapter 5 starts in the 79 through 81 timeframe, where all of the Samosan um, adherents, supporters, are kind of just spread because they flee and they end up in different places. But they're collaborating together to create an opposition, which we later become. Oh, hey, bread maker, how are you? She's over on Rumble. We do see them collectively begin communicating with each other and evolve into the Contras. So this chapter takes a few minutes at the beginning to show you how that occurred. For example, Legion of September 15th, which we've talked about in some of the earlier chapters, talks about them being the hardcore National Guard assassins and terrorists. They were hiding out, primarily the senior ranks, in next door in Guatemala. And they were surviving on doing contract killings, like assassin work, like they were trained by the CIA to do inside of Nicaragua. So you also find another group hanging out in Miami, which again is CIA capital in the US, from all of the using of the Cuban exiles for the attacks on Cuba. They called themselves the National Democratic Union, or UDN. So they're the Miami based faction. And they also had some of their members of the UDN hanging out in Honduras, which again is close to Nicaragua. Those were called the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Nicaragua, or FARN, FARN, is the acronym they used. So both the September 15th Legion and the FARN tapped into Miami's Cuban community, drawing on the Cuban exiles that were trained by the CIA. That's where they touched Gladio. So they even incorporated several of the people, as we know, Felix Rodriguez being one of them, that winds up, because remember, he's Brigade 2506 and a member of the Cuban exile community in Miami. And he ends up as the number 3 guy running Iran-Contra under Vice President Bush, Donald Gregg, his national security advisor, and Felix Rodriguez. He was the number 3 guy running Contra. And he is from the Cuban exile community. And he found himself, Felix Rodriguez, that is, down in Honduras and El Salvador during this period of time. So that's a connection for us. Okay. The Nicaraguans hated Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas almost as much as the Cuban exiles hated Fidel Castro. So they just all fit right in together. So Cuba also had been providing advisors to the new Sandinista government on how to resist CIA infiltration. And then, of course, that totally pissed off the CIA. So, moving on. The combination of Cuban advice and the Sandinistas' own experiences under Somoza's secret police led them to build an efficient body of police inside their Ministry of Interior to thwart any attempt by this CIA amassing of forces around their border. The Contras were forced to rely on help from outsiders, namely the CIA, in order to be able to get military supplies and be able to fight. And that's the reason why they put that group in Miami, because they were going to form the conduit of money, guns, and logistical support from the CIA located in Miami. But it wasn't enough. It's never enough. There began crates of radio equipment and rifles from local Miami sporting goods stores that started flooding in to both Honduras and Guatemala. The crates that were going to Honduras was sent directly to the chief of police for the country named Gustavo Alvarez. He had taken up the Nicaraguan cause because he was on the same payroll that the rest of them were. Honduras had been working with the CIA for a while at that point. Bermudez and other National Guard officers with the League of September 15th, which is hanging out in Guatemala at this point, made the rounds of many of the South American military dictatorships that the CIA had installed. And he found sympathy for their cause, but not a lot of money. They were stashing the money away themselves by doing deals with the CIA. So they weren't necessarily interested in sharing the loot. One of the places that they visited routinely was Argentina. They too were under a military dictatorship that the CIA had been aiding and abetting, and also known as the most brutal in the world. Remember, this is the government that took people up in helicopters and threw them out the back of it because they didn't really want to waste their time disappearing people and having to dig graves for them. So saying they're brutal is probably an understatement. They were evil. The radio station in Costa Rica had been broadcasting some very honest assessments of what the brutal dictatorship was doing in Argentina. And so the Argentina dictatorship said, hey, we'll help you out monetarily wise if you knock out that radio station. So, of course, they were like, sure, we'll go there and knock out the radio station. And they tried, but they didn't successfully knock out. How they tried it was they tried airdropping drums of napalm onto the station roof, thinking that they could burn it down. But the broadcasters, the Argentines had already tried that. So there were beefed up security by the time the exiled Nicaraguans got there under the Legion. And so they thought they were just going to make an easy go of it and throw a few Molotov cocktails in there. And instead, the security at the radio station opened fire on them. And it turned out to be a disaster for the soon-to-be Contras. So they got a lucky break, the Contras, from the American political system in November when Jimmy Carter was defeated. because Jimmy Carter had cut off all aid to South America that was being ran by a military dictatorship and guilty of human rights abuses. So they celebrated when Ronald Reagan got into office because they knew things were going to change at the CIA. When Reagan and Bush looked at Nicaragua, they didn't see citizens uprising against a corrupt dictatorship. They labeled it as, oh my gosh, that has to be communist. And if we don't do something about it, then they're going to turn out to be another Cuba, which of course we heard in Guatemala, in Chile, and every other place they overthrew. So everything as far as these guys and the CIA was concerned was back on track. Reagan froze all aid to the Sandinista government, not the Contras, not the assassins, not Argentina that was dumping people out of helicopters, the Sandinista government. So that, of course, was meant to undermine the Sandinista government. And also, the Sandinistas were obviously not aligned with the mission that was now at hand. CIA agents fanned out across the United States and Central America to begin taking stock of all of the pockets of anti-Sandinista exiles, like they normally do with those exile expat communities. The Argentine military, which was given the cold shoulder by the Carter administration, also noticed that Washington was taking a new look at supporting the soon-to-be Contras. So they decided that even though they hadn't really helped out a lot, that they could help out a whole lot and get into the good graces of the CIA by doing so. So the foreign commander, William Baltano Herrera, says overnight they became special guests in Argentina. They were put up at expensive hotels. They couldn't even basically get a hearing other than Argentina wanting something, like bombing the radio station in Costa Rica before. But it was like the sidewalks was paved with gold during the Reagan administration because they were going to help attack Nicaragua. So they were going down to Argentina a lot. And the Argentines began to ship military weapons and cash into the foreign infrastructure that was being built. By mid-1981, Argentine military advisors were secretly slipping into Honduras and Miami to teach the Nicaraguan exiles how to run guerrilla ops against the Nicaraguan government. They were setting up schools in Miami, just like using the same facilities that the CIA used to train the Cuban exiles to attack Cuba. It was in Buenos Aires, in a residential district, about half an hour from the airport, where former Legion September 15 member Pedro Nunez Cabreza recalls his first 1980, he recalled visiting in a 1985 interview, and basically he paints the picture of them being taught espionage, counter-espionage, interrogation techniques, torture techniques, and how to lead troops in psychological warfare. Kind of like a School of America's set up on the run. So, working closely with the Argentine trainers were General Alvarez's Honduran police, which helped the CIA covertly funnel supplies to the Contras. Once again, Norwin Menendez, and that's the guy that keeps coming up in all of these stories, can be found lurking in the background. He's the guy in San Francisco. His nephew, the drug dealer, Hario confessed to federal prosecutors that he had gone to Nicaragua in 1982 on behalf of his drug dealer uncle Norwin to negotiate terms of an agreement with officers of the national police, which were being funded by the CIA. Under that deal, cocaine seized by Honduran authorities would be sold to Menendez, smuggled out of the country in automobiles, Bridget, bound for the US. Approximately 10 to 20 kilos per month was imported in this manner. Now you know why they have used car dealerships. Herrero Menendez said that the Menendez was working with the Honduran government and that the police agency was aware of all of this. And this information showed up in the CIA and DOJ's files. Outside of Miami's Cuban Bay of Pigs veterans who were put up in training camps for the Contras to train new recruits, and some even invited local press in to witness Nicaraguans being drilled by former Green Berets, like private military companies. But little information was being provided to the American public. But everybody in Central America knew this was going on. The Contras were still what you would call disorganized. They were still in their little faction groups. And we'll go into why that is in a minute. When the CIA got involved in early 1981, its first project was trying to unite all of the groups under one umbrella called the Contras. The bands were too small to be effective and too disorganized. They weren't communicating with each other at the level they needed to. Enrique Bermudez was persuaded to move his Legion of 15 from Guatemala to Honduras when the CIA was sending in dozens of new agents and operatives to Honduras, and one of those was Felix Rodriguez. The agency pressured the Miami-based FARN group to link up with Bermudez's men in the September 15th group. That was going to be a problem because the former Legion member, Pedro Yanez, said that they actually hated each other because the FARN commander, Fernando Chamorro, was a rabble rouser, and he had actually fought for the Sandinistas against Somoza. And it was not until after the Sandinistas took control that he got disgruntled, not unlike a lot of the Cuban exiles, and decided to form his own group in Miami. So the September 15th guys were always for Somoza because they were in his National Guard. So they despised the FARN because it was created by people who were initially against Somoza because they weren't in the National Guard and for the Sandinista government. But they get disgruntled and leave. So they're like mortal enemies, but the CIA insists that they have to work together. Nothing like building a foundation for a coup on quicksand. But that is, in fact, what they decided to do. So the Chamorro's Contra group, with its connections to the Miami Cubans, was actually further along in developing organized regional opposition forces than the Bermudez Legionnaires. So the guys that originally went to Guatemala that was forced to move by the CIA to Honduras, they're the National Guard. So they have a lot of training, but they're now kind of rusty and they're not in sync with the CIA. whereas the CIA and the Cuban exiles have already started training in Miami the Farn, who are their next to the Sandinistas, their mortal enemy. So there's also an element in Costa Rica. And they had to set up a small military camp in Honduras in order to kind of co-locate themselves with this CIA initiative. So lots of bad blood between the groups. They basically wanted nothing to do with each other, resisting the CIA's desire to join forces with the Legion. The Chamaros regarded many of the ex-Guard men of the Legion to be war criminals, and they were never popular in Nicaragua. The Legion was entirely composed of ex-National Guard members. Naturally, one couldn't make a big splash with that in Nicaragua, even if they were to win, because it's just like the old guard coming back. So the people, at least, the Farn felt like at least they were pro-Sandinista at some point, and they should be in charge of this new effort. So when they went back home, they didn't have the stain of the National Guard on them. So you see how this is all really murky. But CIA didn't care. They just want the Sandinista government gone. And they want to use Nicaragua as a drug operation. The CIA eventually got its way after top CIA officials met with their allies in the Honduran military. The Honduran military withdrew support of the Chamorro group and backed Bermudez's Legion instead. So, yeah, back the killers and the assassins. That's from the old government. If the Farn wanted to stay as part of the Contra business, they were going to have to suck it up. So, at a unity meeting that was held in August of 1981 in the Legion's rented safe house in Guatemala City, with an Argentine military officer looking on, Bermudez signed a one-paragraph document stating that the Legion and the Farn would agree to constitute a single organization that was going to go by the name of Nicaraguan Democratic Forces. What a name! The Nicaraguan Democratic Forces that is going to organize a coup. But remember, you have to have a name like a political party that sounds benign. That's what we learned in the Taiwanese political warfare cadre academy, is you disguise your terrorist organization as a democratic element so that when you're attacked by the press, you can say they're attacking democracy. So I'm sure that name was given to them by the CIA. The Chamorro brothers boycotted the meeting rather than sit in the same room with Bermudez, which was fine with Bermudez because he didn't like them either. The Legion moved to Honduras and the FDN was officially created. The Farn were pushed into the background and assigned subordinate roles. The top jobs were filled by Bermudez and his murderous crew from the Legion of September 15. By choosing to support Colonel Bermudez and the FDN over other Contra factions, the CIA threw its lot in with the single most detested group of Nicaraguans they could have picked from. And that was even reported by former New York Times reporter Stephen Kinzer. And we've read one of his books before. He covered the Contras and wrote in 1991, quote, "The American planners never seemed to grasp the simple fact that the Nicaraguans hated the National Guard and would never support an insurgency directed by ex-guardsmen," unquote. So it's just crazy. The CIA's role in the FDN's creation, hidden at the time, was spelled out by former FDN director Edgar Chamorro in an affidavit filed in the World Court in The Hague in 1985. Chamorro, a former advertising executive and distant relative of the Farn Chamorro brothers, said that the CIA paid for the meeting, rented the building, and drafted the agreement. The name of the organization, the members of the political junta, and the members of the general staff were all approved by the CIA. That's in his affidavit. As luck would have it, the CIA selected another one of Norwin's Menendez's friends to assist Bermudez in running the FDN. His name was Aristides Sanchez. He was also a wealthy landowner whose brother Fernandez had been Somoza's last ambassador to Guatemala after Edmundo Menendez was assassinated. And we went over his assassination in the last chapter. Another Sanchez brother, Troilo, had been one of Norwin's friends and business partners in Managua, and yet another brother, Enrique, was partners in a Miami restaurant with Donella Blanton's friend from Miami, Don Barrios, the man Blanton claims that introduced him to Norwin Menendez. Remember, because Blanton is the guy that was in with Somoza big time, flew to Miami, but flew his wife and kids directly to Los Angeles, and then lied about the fact that he was in Miami and what he was doing there, and saying he didn't have enough money to get to LA, even though we found out his wife's uncle gave him $5,000 to travel to the United States. So Blanton is totally a liar. Like Bermudez, Aristide Sanchez went on the CIA's payroll and began reporting daily to his CIA overseers. Together, Bermudez and Sanchez would become the heart of the new Contra organization. The political side was left to the CIA agent Adolfo Calero, the former manager of Coca-Cola in Managua. He worked closely with Aristide Sanchez. Oliver North later called Sanchez the Calero's hatchet man. Though the FDN would change and merge with other groups over the years, Bermudez-Sanchez alliance stood unchanged, thanks largely to the backing of the CIA. Sanchez became one of the Contra's top political and military strategists, plotting logistics, buying supplies, and delivering the weapons, wrote in the Miami Herald in 1993's obituary. Throughout the 1980s, Sanchez was consistently described in the press as the Contra's chief supply guy. And Norwin Menendez explained that when he was having to deliver weapons and supplies to the FDN, I dealt directly with Bermudez and occasionally his assistant, Sanchez. He was a good friend of mine, he said. By November of 81, the Contra project was far enough along that the CIA moved to make its sponsorship of the FDN official. President Reagan was presented with a document known as the National Security Decision Directive number 17, which served as a blueprint for the United States government to overthrow the Sandinista government. It called for the CIA to conduct a variety of covert operations, military and political, against the Sandinista government and asked for $20 million to do it. The document made it clear that that was only a start. That was a deposit on the operation. More funds and manpower would be made available later. It was obvious to anyone that the CIA's it's almost $20 million, wasn't going to go very far in a serious paramilitary operation to the extent that it was being planned. The allocation, in fact, was used by the former CIA deputy director, Admiral Bobby Inman, to ridicule a reporter's suggestion that the CIA was financing a Contra war machine. He basically laughed at the fact that you couldn't do that with $20 million, even though he knew that that was just the deposit. So even if it leaks, they make it out as a laughable accusation, because you can't really do it with that. But they all know they have covert funding too. That was just what was appropriated for the official document. The covert operation, according to Reagan's directive, would be conducted primarily through non Americans, for plausible deniability. In particularly, it was a delicate situation. The agency would send unilaterally controlled Latino assets, they called it UCLA, to do the dirty work. That way, if any of them got caught, the CIA could throw up their hands and said they had no idea that was going on. Plausible deniability. Reagan approved the intelligence findings, and in December of 1981, and keep in mind, this is the first year in office, he sent CIA Director William Casey to present the finding to Congress, saying it was a covert operation planned for Nicaragua and that it was in the interest of the United States national security. How? What happened in Nicaragua had nothing to do with the United States national security. They don't tell you how. But this goes to the heart of the point that I've made throughout this entire research project. Congress knows every fucking time, and they don't do anything about it. And then they act stupid when they have the Contra hearings, like it's the first time they've heard any of it. The Contra hearings, like every other congressional committee, is a kabuki dance. 100%. From that point on, the Contras were the CIA's responsibility. From the late 1981 through 1984, the agency ran the show, directly doing weapons, money laundering, hiring subcontractors, ferrying supplies, planning strategy and tactics, and keeping tabs on all of it. The Nicaraguans soon learned their role was to fight and to obey orders. Someone else, usually an American CIA agent or an Argentine military trainer, would do the thinking for them. One order the Nicaraguans were repeatedly given was to vehemently deny any knowledge of CIA involvement. Bermudez played that role to the hilt, angrily brushing off any press suggestion that the U.S. government had a hand in the running of the FDN. His quote, "We would never accept the role of American mercenary," Bermudez said, but they did. Former FDN director Edgar Chamorro claimed that the CIA advisors prepped them for their press conferences and told them to deny they had received any money from the U.S. government. It was particularly important that we deny having met with any U.S. government officials, Chamorro recounted in his book called Packaging the Contras. Blanton said that when he began selling drugs for the FDN in Los Angeles, he was aware the U.S. government had somehow become involved in his organization, but didn't see any direct evidence of it himself. To further insulate themselves from the Contras, the CIA officials worked out deals with the Argentine and Honduras generals. The Americans would supply it with cash if the Argentines would supply the training and military advisors. The Hondurans would provide the clandestine bases from which the Contras would operate. As their part of the deal, both countries would get a lot better treatment and much more foreign and military aid from the U.S. government. That sounds exactly like what we did in Afghanistan with the Pakistani ISI. It's a pattern. The $20 million, the CIA's money that Reagan had approved, didn't ever actually go to the Contras. It went to Honduras and the Argentine military. And according to the Contras, they saw very little of it. Kind of exactly like Afghanistan, where the ISI was out buying outdated Russian equipment to give to the people the CIA was supporting in Afghanistan from Bulgaria. Same thing. They handled all of the money, meaning Honduras and Argentina. The Nicaraguans from Bermudez needing several $100s for the rent of a safe house to a foot soldier on leave in the capital asking for a couple of bucks to go see a movie. It had to come from an Argentinian general. This is a quote. That was just one of the ways, some subtle and some anything but, that the Argentines let us know they were in charge. While the Contras were forced to beg, the Argentines were being paid as much as $2,500 to $3,000 a month each in a salary that the CIA was funding, some of which is our taxpayer dollars. And that came directly from an Argentine advisor that was involved in it. He described multi-million-dollar purchases carried out by the Argentinian advisors to Honduras. Furniture, equipment, tools, office equipment, multi-million-dollar purchases from pharmacies. Wonder what that was. The owner made himself a multi-millionaire of one of the local businesses in Argentina just providing supplies for this, as well as the hotel, where they rented out an entire wing of the hotel and put up the Argentinian military that was on the payroll of the CIA. They had nice cars, etc. It was against this backdrop that Menendez and Blanton had been called to Honduras to meet with Enrique Bermudez, where they were told by the new FDN commander to raise money in California. And of course, that money they were going to raise in California was going to be from drugs. Danielle Blanton, first illegal Contra fundraising efforts were not all that successful, which is, of course, why he got into cocaine. He had trouble in the first of that, too, because he was in LA, and the real cocaine market had already been established in San Francisco, where, of course, there's another large CIA presence. But that network in San Francisco was much more well developed because Menendez personally oversaw that one. He just had Blanton doing it in Los Angeles. So that's where, remember the Torres brothers, the big tree trunk, one of which was a former Marine. One of the Torres brothers told the FBI that Blanton was unable to unload the cocaine that Menendez kept dumping on him. Torres stated that Blanton and the others only sold a few ounces down in the San Diego area. They gave the rest of the cocaine to a guy by the name of Raul Vega, who was the one-eyed driver from that drove Menendez around and delivered cocaine for him. Menendez was pushing Blanton all the time to sell the cocaine. He was introducing him to people, and of course, we're only getting Blanton's story because Blanton's a known liar, so you have to keep that with a grain of salt. Between 81 and 82, he said that he had provided several $1,000s in drug profits to finance the FDN's wing in Los Angeles. The drug money was used to support the operating expenses, plane tickets, rent, office spaces. Menendez was doing the same, Blanton said, estimating that basically contributing as much as $40,000 in the first year that he was involved in it. Most of the money he made from cocaine sales, Blanton said, was turned over to Menendez. He just kept a little pocket change, to pay rent. The cash deliveries to the Contras for selling the cocaine in the United States was being handled by someone else. The unidentified Latino male, whom the DEA agent Sandra Smith had seen pick up the cocaine from LA at the San Francisco airport and drive to the house in the earlier chapters. The DEA agent, Smith, gut feeling about Menendez's drug ring was right on target. She discovered the first direct evidence of the Contra drug pipeline in California. And of course, for her work, she was reassigned. In the fall of 81, before his troubles began, Carlos Gabanza Ramirez was living, breathing proof that the American could still be the land of opportunity. Now, this guy has a really sad story. Carlos, sad in a ironic kind of way, Carlos had been kind of a self-made man in Nicaragua. And in the 1970s, he went to the United States, where he spent 4 years studying to be a commercial pilot, working nights as a janitor to support himself. He took his pilot license back to Nicaragua and joined the National Guard, flying for Somoza's army. He managed the crop dusting company on the side. Later, I don't know how you say his last name, Caballas, enrolled in the National University in Nicaragua, and he got an accounting degree. And he started working for none other than Bank of America. Isn't that weird? Bank of America keeps showing up over and over again in our Gladio story. You know, because Bank of America is the bank that gave BCCI, the CIA's money laundering bank in Pakistan / city of London / Luxembourg, that grew to be the 7th largest corrupt bank in the world. Bank of America gave them their seed money to start. So weird that this guy started working at Bank of America. He also got promoted to be in charge of the Managua's branch at the Bank of America. He was he then took that opportunity to get a law degree. So he's an accountant, he's a pilot, and a lawyer in Nicaragua. So he sets up a practice. But the very next year, after he got his law license, the Sandinistas were on the outskirts of Managua. And Cabanas had been recalled to active duty to be a fighter pilot. He was happy to defend the Somoza government. Near the end of the war, when the Guard was desperately striking out at every perceived enemy, Cabeza took part in the terror bombing of the city of Masaya, something he didn't like talking about. On July 15, 1979, 4 days before the shooting stopped, Cabeza caught the last flight out of Managua. He went to San Francisco, where his wife and 3 daughters, his mother, his brothers, and sisters were already living. With the family to support, he needed a job. So he starts working all kinds of jobs. He took a second job as a night manager. He gets a job at Lincoln Insurance Company in San Francisco, and he's working at the hotel as the nighttime janitor. And within a year, he gets named the cell agent of the year for the Lincoln Insurance Company. But he really, really wanted to go to law school in America and go back to practicing law. So he did everything he could to try to figure out how to do that. Well, it just so happens that his wife had an uncle who happened to be in drug trafficking. His name was Julio Zavala, Zavala. So, 2 years older and recently divorced from Cabraza's sister, Julio Zavata was living the big life. He had plenty of money. So Cabreza decides he's going to go ask his now divorced relative for a loan to go back to law school. And Zavada has a better idea. He says, why don't you come work for me and I can make you a lot of money and it'll only be a part-time job like running money and you don't have to actually sell drugs. But hey, we can figure out something for you to do and you could go to law school at night. So he thinks that's a swell idea. So being the cocaine dealer that Savala was, he was a very busy guy. He wasn't nearly as successful as Menendez was, but Savala was definitely a good mid-level cocaine trafficker in San Francisco. He sold cocaine by the kilos. He also sold it to street-level dealers. So he thought it would be great to have an accountant work for him and keep his books. And that was what Savala was going to do for him. So it also included taking money to Miami and sometimes even to Nicaragua. And Cabreza was happy to do all of it because, it was basically just a part-time job that required a little traveling. But it just so happens that Savala didn't share all of his concerns with poor Cabreza. And what he really wanted, because he was starting to feel some heat, is he wanted to lay low and let someone else, if he was going to get busted, take the heat for him. So there had been some loose talk around some of the drug dealings that Savala had been involved in. The local DEA agents had busted several people in South San Francisco for a half a kilo of cocaine. One of the women arrested was a Contra fundraiser by the name of Doris Solomon. She was a co-defendant with Lilia Bajago. So they're in jail. And Samala mentions that the cocaine they'd been busted with wasn't hers, that it belonged to her boyfriend, who she called Noel. That's not his real name. A month later, DEA agent Louis Lupin stopped by Blajengo's house to see if she could be of some assistance to the authorities. Blajengo didn't know much. She told Lupin that Doris Solomon did say that she had gotten the coke from her boyfriend, some guy named Noel. He made a note of that and filed it. When Solomon appeared in federal court 5 months later for a bail hearing, she made a passing reference to her boyfriend, a guy by the name of Julio Zavala, as in Zavala, the guy that hired Cabreza. Agent Lupin was sitting in the courtroom. Could Julio Zavala be Noel? The agent hurried over to the jail and asked to see the visitor's log for the time that Doris Solomon had been there before. And bingo, Julio Zavala had come to see her 3 different times in 11 days. Checking with the San Francisco Police Department, Lupin discovered that Zavala, a Nicaraguan immigrant, was no angel. Just a month before, Solomon had been arrested. Zavala and another man had been nabbed trying to bust into a woman's apartment, allegedly to collect a drug debt from her husband. She called the police, and when The irate dealer was busted out, was hustled out to the curb. The cops found 5 ounces of cocaine in the Cadillac that Savala had parked outside. To be precise, it wasn't actually Savala's Cadillac. It had actually been stolen in Miami and taken to San Francisco. Lupin noticed that the other man arrested with Savala that day was Edmundo Roca. He had been one of those that Doris Solomon had identified months later. And in Roca's wallet, the police had found a slip with Julio and a number. It was a really small world. So that was the way Savala's luck had been going. He had been busted twice. His girlfriend had been busted. His friend, Roca, had been busted twice. The charges against Savala had been dropped each time, like he was being protected. But he was afraid it was going to happen a third time and maybe his luck was going to run out. Zavala was moving a lot of cocaine. He had customers in Miami, Los Angeles, Chicago, and San Francisco. He was also making a lot of trips into Oakland's black neighborhoods selling cocaine to African American dealers. His business was booming. When asked, Savala said that he worked as a buyer for some supermarket in Costa Rica, which helped him cover with a cover story for his frequent trips to Miami and to Central America. But that story didn't explain why the telephone in his apartment was ringing nonstop with a steady stream of people that came in and out at all hours. What he needed to do was fade into the background for a little while and lower his profile. That's where Cabreza came in. He was going to basically take over the network, and Savala was going to head down to Costa Rica and hang out with his girlfriend. Maybe get married, just kind of fade into the background. Still going to get his cut, but he wasn't going to take the heat. So, Cabreza said that eventually tells the feds that he was going to help me finance my law school so I could quit my job. And he said I was going to be delivering cocaine and collecting money so that he could have a little bit of time to cool off. That's actually in testimony. At that time, Mr. Savala was having problems himself with some legal problems. And he said, I was lucky that the charges were dismissed. I don't want to get myself in this transaction, so I want you to work it for me, which was the next big drug deal coming up. Savala told Cabreza that he'd pay him $500 for each kilo of cocaine that he delivered, plus a percentage of any drug debts that he collected. There would be an added bonus that Savala knew Cabreza would like. Given the former's, and he also said that they were donating with every kilo to the Contras. So Carlos Cabreza, who had been a lawyer, an accountant, a pilot, an insurance salesman, a banker, a janitor, a crop duster, became a cocaine dealer. At first, he stayed around San Francisco, running errands, meeting the customers, delivering the drugs. And the money was very good. One of his first errands was to pick up a gold Toyota and drive it to the airport where he was to meet a couple of Julio's friends from LA. And Cabreza agreed to put them in his house. And that is the story, if you guys remember, in like chapter 2, where the female DEA agent was hanging out monitoring the house and she saw the people walk in. That's what she saw. She saw this. She saw him going to the airport and picking those men up and bringing them back to her house. Again, she was let go. She had all of this. It's like that story of Epstein and the ABC reporter. I had it all. She had it all. And because she had it all and had figured out way too much for the CIA to be comfortable with her to continue in her job, she was reassigned. Just like Zavala was let off without charges. So, in a recently recent for this book, declassified CIA Inspector General report shows that the agency had been wise to Zavala since 1980. So the CIA knew all of this and did nothing about it. That year, a CIA operative reported that Zavala was supplying drugs to a Nicaraguan official who was a drug addict. The operative would keep the agency apprised of Zavala's activities for years. In addition, the CIA had admitted that a relative of one of the people involved in the drug wing was actually a CIA agent. So the CIA is involved in 100% of the cocaine coming in to California. They know all about it. And they are working behind the scenes if somebody gets busted to ensure that the charges don't get followed up on. So, Webb goes on to say that hiring Cabreza was a genius idea for Zavala because everybody liked him. He had a great personality. Zavala and his girlfriend, Dora Solomon, the one that had been arrested and then had the bail hearing where they found out who Zavala was, she jumps bail and flies down to Costa Rica. And Cabeza flies down there routinely to keep Zavala apprised of the business going on in San Francisco. So Cabreza said that the cocaine he and Zavala were selling came from two separate sources. One was Alvaro Minota, a Colombian who lived in San Francisco. His surname is Carvajal. Carvajal was part of a ring of international cocaine dealers located in Cali, Colombia. Isn't that nice? We know all about the Cali cartel in Colombia, don't we? That was the CIA-sanctioned narco state network, as opposed to the Medellin cartel that they didn't like. A group that would later become known as the Cali cartel. By the early 1990s, the Cali dealers would operate the world's biggest cocaine network, eclipsing all others. But in 1981, few in the U.S. law enforcement circles had ever even heard of them. Cabreza began making trips to Cali, Colombia, to negotiate deliveries for Zavala. Another source, Cabreza said, was in Costa Rica. That cocaine would arrive by courier via Miami and would sometimes be brought in by Cabreza's house for safekeeping. Because each source had different prices and delivery costs, Cabreza had to keep two sets of books to keep everything straight and to know who to pay what when the drugs were sold. They were even of different qualities. He got proof of in December 1981 when Zavala called him from Costa Rica and told him to catch the next plane down. Zavala wanted him to meet some friends of his. The friends turned out to be two Nicaraguans who were working with Norwin Menendez. Horatio Petrira Lanuza, a drug dealer and gambler, and Troilo Sanchez Herfosio. He was a playboy, brother of the FDN leader Aristide and Fernando Sanchez. Fernando Sanchez had been Somoza's last ambassador to Guatemala after the brother Menendez had been shot. Remember, he got assassinated, and so this guy replaced him. He's a drug dealer too. Not surprising. The U.S. State Department, in a 1988 publication, described Fernando as the Contras representative in Guatemala. Troilo Sanchez had been a partner of Menendez in one of the Norwins nightclub in Managua. So they'd known each other for a very long time and was good friends with Somoza. A pilot, Sanchez, said he flew for the CIA in the early 60s for the Bay of Pigs, which was partly staged from Nicaragua. But by the late 70s, he had been a hopeless drug addict, spending large sums of his family's fortune on heroin, cocaine, women, and gambling. The Sandinistas seized what was left of his fortune. So he went to Costa Rica, where he became partners with Menendez in drugs. He said of Menendez that they were like family. Horatio Perino had also been a business partner of Menendez before the revolution. Menendez said that they owned cattle and ranches together and that they had known each other since they were children. Pereira had owned the gambling clubs in Managua under Somoza. Cabreza told the CIA investigators that his December 1981 meeting in Costa Rica was the genesis of an effort to raise money for the Contras by selling drugs, although the original reason for the meeting was purely social. Cabreza said Sanchez and Perina raised the idea of selling cocaine as a means of fundraising for the Contras. Cabreza said Perina and Sanchez discussed the idea with him because both knew of Cabreza's role in the Zavala network. Although it was Sanchez and Perina's idea to raise the funds for the Contra by engaging drugs, Cabreza says it was Zavala who came up with the idea that Cabreza would serve as the go-between and basically run the network. So Zavala sent Cabreza back to Costa Rica with two other men to pick up 2 kilos of cocaine from Perea. But Perea was suddenly uncomfortable with the arrangement. And he basically said that he wanted to cut Zavala out because he didn't trust him. Now, Cabreza owes everything that he's doing right now to Zavala. So he, off the kind of privately, tells Zavala what they said. Zavala tells him to go ahead because now he trusts Cabreza even more for him telling him that they wanted to cut him out. So Cabreza basically keeps Zavala in on it, but he rearranges his finances, and now he's going to be making even more money and kind of paying Zavala on the side. So Cabrera insists that Cabreza had to accept responsibility for the cash because the money belonged to help the Contras and not like the proceeds of it. Whatever the agreed amount percentage was going to go to the Contras after everybody got their cut. So Cabreza traveled with Perea to Honduras, where he met with other members of the Perea family. He stayed in their house, and an exiled Nicaraguan attorney um, who had been educated in the United States was there as well. He had been living in Honduras for 2 or 3 years, working on all of this drug shipment network. So they had already figured out how to do all of it. And keep in mind, Honduras is where the CIA is. When he showed, so they send baskets, like souvenir baskets, back with Cabrera's to the United States. And he thinks he just has souvenirs. Well, Zavala happened to be in the room when he's pulling out these souvenirs. And Zavala grabs the basket and starts slitting the reeds of the basket. They have cocaine in them. They were transmitting kilos of cocaine. I forget how much they said was in each reed. So they slit it open with a razor blade. I think it says right here, 3 ounces of cocaine in each basket reed. So each basket actually contained a kilo because of how big the baskets were. And that's how they were trafficking cocaine. And they were even paying flight attendants on airlines to take these quote unquote souvenirs from Honduras, Costa Rica, and all of these different locations into the United States. And they would have people meet the aircraft basically saying that they were just souvenirs for family or whatever, and they were all full of cocaine. That's crazy. So it says they made regular trips carrying money for the Contras. He told CIA investigators that on average, he earned $64,000 on each trip of his 20 trips to Central America, although he also claims that another person once delivered $250,000 to Perina and Sanchez in Costa Rica. FBI records show that Zavala made a money hauling trip to Costa Rica in 1982 and said the amount he was carrying was $250,000. The FBI was informed early on that the Contras were deeply involved in the drug ring. In February of 1982, an informant reported that Zavala had been making silencers and sending them to Nicaragua for the revolution. The same informant who reported the Contra leader, Adolfo Calero, the FDN's political boss and longtime CIA agent, was definitely involved in the cocaine trafficking. It appears, however, that he was going by a different name. So for a little while, there was some confusion. The FBI teletype shows that by November 1982, the Bureau, thanks to a wiretap and inside informants, knew exactly what was going on inside the Zavala drug ring. According to the report from the San Francisco FBI, they offered the FBI director in Washington, well, they sent to the FBI director. This is a quote, Zavala sources of supply of the cocaine are Julio Sanchez, Fernando Sanchez, and Horacio Perina. All those are operating out of Costa Rica. As for Capreza's source of supply for cocaine had been established as Trujillo Sanchez, Fernando Sanchez, and Perillo of Costa Rica. So they know exactly where the cocaine's coming from. They know where it's going. And all of this is written down in the FBI. Though the FBI didn't realize it, the cable exposed yet another LA-based Contra drug dealer, Sebastian Pinal. He first appeared in the CIA files in late 1980, at the inception of the CIA's counter-revolutionary arrangement. The CIA identified Penal as the leader of the unnamed Contra group in Honduras and knew the Contra boss was a reported drug trafficker, describing him as a partner and best friend of Perea, which was Norwin Menendez, Costa Rica drug broker. Cabreza was taking, now he was making $50,000 a month. He was taking $50,000 a month to the Contras Miami office. He often would give the money directly to the FDN leader, Sanchez, the brother of the supplier of the drugs. Aristide Sanchez died in 1993. He was still working on behalf of the Contras at the time of his death, according to his obituary. Cabreza told the CIA that he never specifically told Aristide Sanchez that the money came from drug proceeds, but only that it was from Trujillo. Cabreza said he assumed Aristide Sanchez must have known that Trujillo was involved in drug trafficking. Other Contras certainly did. Former Contra official Leonardo Rodriguez told UPI in 1986 that Trujillo sold 200 pounds of cocaine and received $6 million for it. The money Cabreza took to Central America was given to Perea and the FDN logistics officer by the name of Vega, who lived in Honduras. He assumed the money was being used to buy food and clothing for the newly formed Contra guerrillas. So, as you can see, this is crazy. I'm going to stop right there for the day, but it is obvious that not only in statements from informants within the FBI and statements to the CIA when they sent, quote unquote, an investigator to talk to these people, they knew all of this was happening and they didn't do anything to stop it. So it just kept going on and on and on. And people are dying. People are getting addicted. The entire Black community in Los Angeles is getting exploited. The Black community in Oakland is getting exploited. And the government was doing it to covertly fund the Contras. So, let me bring Bridget back up here. All right. Did you want to add anything, Bridget?
They are sick son of a bitches. That's all I can just say. You know, when you think you've heard it all, just hang in there. We're not till the next chapter.
That's actually true, because I'm past the next chapter. It's crazy, and it gets crazier. So, Illini?
Hey, Colonel. Hey, Bridget. I caught some of this. I've been in and out a little because I had a phone call, too. The one thing that I picked up on the Savalas stuff, first off, Colonel, you mentioned Bank of America, and you mentioned a couple of other places where they've come up. One that you didn't mention was Jack Anderson's ITT memo from 1970, where ITNT, this big corporation that just had their, assets in Chile nationalized, is plotting a coup down there. And one of the things that they bring up in that memo is that they secured commitments from Bank of America to cease business. So they were reaching out to other corporations, of course, for support, in dealing with this nationalization. And they came up there. So that's one more link in all of this. Another thought on Savalas is, if you're doing something where you need to have secret conversations with people, being a lawyer is really helpful. I'll just say that, because then everything is privileged.
No, that's a great point.
And then the federal government has to go out and prove the crime or fraud exception. But how do you do that without being able to interrogate anybody or ask anybody about anything? Because their response will just be, well, it's legally privileged. So, I mean, that was what, if people watch the Trump case in Georgia, where they were, interviewing, the witness and the Fannie witness, the Fannie Willis and Wade case, that third witness there, they were trying to, interrupt some of the questions there with assertions of privilege, and it's interesting how that kind of gums up the system.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So, anybody want to guess who the FBI director was in 1980?
Please don't tell me it was Bob Mueller.
It was William Webster. And guess where he went to work? The CIA director.
Yes, of course he did. One hand washing the other, right?
William Webster was the CIA director and goes on to be the CIA director. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just crazy.
And guess when he was the CIA director? He was the CIA director from 1987 to 1991. So he basically was the CIA director when all the shit about Iran-Contra was coming out. Just a little coincidence. You just can't make this shit up. Oh, hey, I did all of this shit and I didn't tell anybody that they're running cocaine trafficking networks all over the United States while I'm the FBI director. Oh shit, it hit the fan. Let me run over to the CIA to make sure all of it gets hidden. It's just absolutely ridiculous. The entire thing is corrupt. And I don't know if you guys remember, the other thing William Webster is known for is a thing called abscam. That's where the FBI basically was setting up congressional members. What they did was they posed. It's literally a witch hunt. They posed as Arab sheiks offering bribes to politicians, and then they end up charging the politicians and convicted a senator and 6 House of Representatives on bribery and corruption charges.
I think most of them, I mean, the funny thing is that most of them wound up taking it. There were 2 that refused. One, I'm trying to remember, was the basketball player. It was the NCAA championship basketball player who, also was a Rhodes Scholar. And I think Murtha was the other guy who basically said, I'm not comfortable. One guy reported it to the FBI, I think a senator, and another guy, I think Murtha, basically said, you know what, let's not do this. I'm not comfortable with this. But I think everybody else took the money.
The senator was a Democrat from New Jersey, Williams. The representatives was from Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Pennsylvania, New York. Florida and New Jersey again. Myers, Jenrette, Lederer, Murphy, Kelly, and Thompson, all convicted. So nothing like the FBI running a sting on Congress and setting them up.
I mean, could you imagine what would happen if they tried to do that today? I mean, if
I think they still do it. They did it to Matt Gaetz.
I mean, I'm okay with them doing something like this, but they have to have a predicate. Like, they have to have people going to them saying that this guy's taking money. And the ideal way to do it would only be to run a sting to prove another case. To basically say that there's this pattern going on, and then you can say it goes to pattern. That would be the ideal way. Unfortunately, our legal system's a little bit more aggressive,
but they ran the sting on the whole. I know what you're saying as far as but I think they run stings all the time, and set people up.
I mean, the Gretchen Whitmer situation
yes.
is proof of that. Which I think it's really unfortunate. But the rule on entrapment, says that if the government can show that you were predisposed to commit the crime anyways, which is really ridiculous. And I mean, the situation right now with Homan, I think.
I was just going to say that. Yes, Homan.
I mean, Tom Homan, it's my understanding, he had this business that was running, and somebody basically said, I want to do business with you.
Yes.
And we're going to do it in 2025. And he's like, you realize that, I might get, if I wind up working for the federal government, I'm not going to be able to keep running my business.
Right.
And I'm going to have to give the money back to you.
Right.
That's my understanding, from Bill Shipley, on some of the context here.
Well,
so it does look, and then they gave him a bag of cash, and
they insisted.
If I were Tom Homan, I would have given the bag of cash back and said, "Can you please just give me a check?" But
he did. But they insisted on paying him in cash, and that was them. And also the point to make, and Shipwreck made this point, that in order for that to be legitimate, there had to be somebody other than a federal agent involved in it. And so far as we know, it was just basically an undercover sting being ran at Tom Homan to get dirt on him. And it was done under Biden. And they did nothing under Biden when he took the $50,000 supposedly in cash. The White House said he didn't even actually take the money, but whatever. They ran this sting on him, and then they sit on it until he gets in the job. If that's not bullshit, I don't know what is.
There's some problems with this story. I mean, if I'm Kash Patel, or if I'm Pam Bondi, or whoever the Attorney General is, I mean, like, the first question is, do they have a predicate? Like why did they go after Tom? Why did they do this?
Well, we know why.
Well, okay, there could be a political reason. If it's purely, if the reason is purely political,
yeah.
My suggestion to Shipley was, and I hate to do this, but these people have basically, I think you got to prove that you got to show that this was political. But if they can do that, I think what you can do is you can basically say, guys, look, you filled out these, Form 302s. You made all these sworn statements saying that you were going out and you were attempting to bribe this person. You've just committed attempted bribery.
Right.
And we're not necessarily sure that you got, government authorization or an entrapment defense of your own here. You might be criminally liable for this.
Well, it's
Have you considered that?
Yeah, it's interesting that they've not, because to me, the best thing to do this, if you're truly transparent, is to name the FBI guy they ran at him.
I agree. They should come out and they should basically say this was the name of the FBI guy.
Yep.
They should probably also talk about his other operations.
Yep.
If there were political targets there.
Yep.
And if there's this pattern and there's no predicate to it, I think and you've got a reasonable, local district attorney somewhere. I think you could basically say that, well, no, you can't. He's doing it under color of law. It's got to be a federal prosecution. He's got state immunity. I guess you got to run this to the DOJ, and Trump's got to take responsibility for it. But it's very tempting here.
If you don't expose these people, if
the political setup,
if you don't expose these people, they're going to keep doing it.
You can go one step further. You can go one step further on it, half a step further on it, which is probably where I would just leave it at, is to just say that these individuals may have criminal liability, and they try again to sign a tolling agreement for the next administration.
Yeah. To me, it's just, and obviously we see these, because it has gone on in the past and it's been allowed to go on, they are emboldened with their criminality. That's the same with the CIA. And that's the whole point to all of this, is as long as they are allowed to perpetuate criminality, there's no incentive for them to not do it.
They're emboldened by their criminality. And then when you basically try to hold them to the same rules, they come out and basically say that this is authoritarianism and it's fascism. And it's like, wait, we were just here. You guys did the exact same thing to us. It seems like you're labeling that fascism.
Yeah. So, yeah. And that's the hypocrisy of it. And I honestly, though, Illini, believe that is what's waking people up. You are calling Trump a fascist for enforcing federal law on immigration. And it's actually more fascist if you don't. If you can make up whatever laws you want to enforce whenever you want to enforce them, and you have a government that chooses which laws, and in some cases no laws, like in child trafficking, that's fascism. The free of the freedom of the government to wield ultimate power over people and have no accountability, that's fascism. And yet Trump, on the other hand, is actually implementing the laws on the books, and he's called the fascist. It's like we're living in a Twilight Zone.
Yeah, well, people, Democrats are going to perceive this as a partisan conversation, but when you talk about what happened to Jimmy Kimmel, and my response is, I feel bad for Jimmy Kimmel, but I wish he was there, for Mel Gibson. I wish he was there for
they're not
Roseanne.
They have selective enforcement, and that means there is none.
And that's why people are kind of moving away from the legacy media, and because the analysis is like it's messed up, and it's sort of the self-feeding cycle where either Jimmy Kimmel loses viewers, and the people who defend him but didn't defend all this other stuff, they lose viewers too, and people kind of wake up to it eventually that in a republic we can't have a dual legal system. We have to have the same set of rules for everybody. But
people now can clearly see we don't. If you're a Catholic standing on a sidewalk in front of an abortion clinic, you're going to get arrested. If you're a parent going to a school board meeting, calling out the school board for pornographic books and raping of a girl in a school where the school tried to hide it, the parents are the fascists. The parents are the ones that get arrested. The parents are the one that have cases opened on them in the FBI. The FBI was clearly being used as a weapon against the United States populace. That's fascism. Sorry, that's just the very definition of it.
And that's why I think, what happened this weekend, with the Charlie Kirk Memorial was so powerful. I mean, obviously, first off, what happened to him, and basically everybody signing up, the turning point in response. That is, exactly the kind of behavior that you want in, a revolution, peaceful revolution.
Yes.
A constitutional revolution, whatever you want to call it,
or revival.
When people, when somebody gets shot in front of everyone, and everybody sees it, and the response is, "I want to do exactly what he was doing to get himself shot." It really kind of causes a big problem, for whoever who's doing the retaliating, because whatever it was, it didn't work. It backfired.
Correct.
And I mean, my thinking on it was, I think Republicans are deterred and they're, scared of getting prosecuted. What they do not want to have is they don't want to have some federal prosecutor they don't want to have their door knocked down at 5 o'clock in the morning. People come in and raid them while they're sleeping, put handcuffs on them, lead them off to, a jail, process them, have the Department of Justice force them to hire defense attorneys, and go through 2 years of the federal government basically telling you that every single day that you're a horrible person and we're watching you. And then, of course, get dragged into court and have that whole process. That's deterrence. Killing somebody, that's not something that I think a lot of Republicans, the Christian right, isn't afraid of that. That's actually less deterrent. And then I think once people see that, then the original, we're going to prosecute you stuff loses its deterrence too, because it loses its credibility.
Well, true. Everything you said is true. Obviously, they're setting a very dangerous precedent. And I think in doing so in such quick, repetitive form, they are exposing themselves. And if you, not including the Charlie Kirk piece of it, but if you, and I've said this from the very beginning, if you take the first term of Donald Trump, which was so extremely successful in his economics, and he was so successful they had to unleash COVID. And then you put in Biden, and you book in Biden with Trump undoing all of the evilness, you've kind of bookended Biden in the middle of what you and I know to be a fascist dictatorship of unequal justice and persecution of the American population that didn't vote the right way. It makes it extremely difficult, cognitive dissident wise, for people not to say, what the hell? Because the stark contrast of those two bookends makes even the dopiest person that wants to keep their head in the sand, it makes it very, very uncomfortable for them to keep their head in the sand. The sand has become so hot that they can no longer keep their head buried. They are forced into recognizing what is going on in our country. And for those of us who want a republic back, I think that is a very, very important phenomenon that needs to be recognized for what it's doing to galvanize people that had otherwise, the soccer mom who doesn't want to be bothered with politics are now being forced to bother with it, especially in light of what happened today, with the exposure of known research studies that has been hidden away, of what the effects on, taking something like Tylenol is. Why was that not made a big deal? Why was that not front page news in 2008 when they released the first study that suggested that that was a causal effect? So even the soccer mom now has to pay attention to politics. And believe me, I know this for a fact because the lady that does my nails is one of those women. And she is now one of the most involved people in our local area because she has children and she can no longer keep her head buried in the sand. When I first started going to her, she was clueless as to what was going on. She is no longer clueless, and had a little bit to do with me, but it had everything to do with her mom instincts. And I think this is just I think they have no idea what they were already awakening in people in America. And I think the Charlie Kirk assassination galvanized the people that may have been slightly awake, into being not only on the sidelines, now they're in the game. That was a fatal mistake. Go ahead, Bridget.
Okay. General Flynn, a long time ago, said something that came up in my mind when all this was going down. And he said, it takes a lot to get people essentially off their butt and active in the community. It's going to take something big. And I think you're right. This has been edging everyone to that moment. And the Charlie Kirk, the ridicule of him after he died was that fire that finally got people up and involved, even though they didn't want to, because it was that final throw, the final straw, so to speak, that finally got everyone, they had enough.
Yep. I agree. Well, that was a lively conversation.
Colonel.
Always.
Oh, Bridget, do you have?
Go ahead.
Bridget, if you want to go ahead. Okay. Colonel, how do you assess the situation with, it looks like there was some planning, but before the shooting, obviously there's a lot of moving parts right now. There's, uncorroborated stories about the shooter getting into a car. I'm not sure how historians will see this in 20 or 30 years. We might still be arguing about, that. But, the FBI did put out text messages, between him and, his the
other guy.
Yeah. And number one, the text messages don't seem like a normal conversation, I guess.
So let me just help you with that. My 25-year-old daughter that's a school teacher, one of the very first things she said to me was, "Mom, we don't talk like that." So, and she is like, my middle daughter is in all of this stuff. My younger daughter is not. And for her the first words out of her mouth was, "We don't talk like that." And I looked at her and I said, "I know you don't, honey. You send me text messages." So, yes, keep on going.
So, I guess, I think they put it in the indictment, which, raises and if they put those text messages in the indictment, that's a real head scratcher here, because that's a sworn. I mean, that is a sworn representation to the grand jury. So,
well, they're on his phone. You have to include them. That doesn't mean in the actual trial, it's not going to come out that he was reposting something that was provided to him.
Yeah. So that could be the other story going on, which
Yeah.
is that they're messaging each other these things, and they were these text messages are real. They were typed by him. They were sent by him. They were put there on his phone.
So hold on, hold on.
Hasn't covered them.
Hold on, hold on.
Okay, go ahead.
You do not know that they were typed by him, because there is a software the CIA has that they can insert text messages in your system. They have the ability to do that. They have the ability to plant stuff on your computer.
Oh yeah.
So all he has to do, I mean, they were right in putting them in the indictment because they're on his phone. All he has to do when he goes to trial is say, I didn't compose that text. He can either say that it was provided to him to copy and paste into a text, or he can literally say, I didn't text that. I have no idea what he's going to say, but that is a possibility.
And I guess the one other thing that, I made of this whole thing is, J.D. Vance goes on and guest hosts for Charlie, during Turning Point USA. And, he certainly, inside the walls of executive privilege. And I have a feeling that, Trump knows how this investigation's going. Like, if I were Trump, I would want to know. And we have for the Nixon tapes that Nixon, wanted to know when George Wallace got shot. He was actually, running some parts of the investigation from behind the scenes. The interesting thing that came up, for me when J.D. Vance hosted it was he talked about George Soros. He referenced an article in The Nation magazine, which, contained a number of falsehoods about things that Charlie Kirk said after, he got shot.
Right.
And he referenced that the magazine was funded by George Soros and the Ford Foundation, and they're running this huge misinformation campaign.
Yeah.
And I wonder where this is all going to lead. Obviously it looks like, Robinson had some help. Or at the very least, there was some communications about this ahead of time.
Yeah.
Millie Weaver has done a lot of reporting on the Sunrise Movement, on Lisa Fithian giving training to the Open Society's funded organizations. And she would refer to them as, affinity groups. They're not Antifa. They're these affinity groups that all kind of hang out and talk about things secretly on their own. On their own different discords and their own private networks. It will be fascinating to see if this connects, to some of these, Lisa Fithian related.
I don't see this any different than Gladio cells in the electronic age. That's what I see. This is the modern day Gladio program. There is a shadow network that coordinates training, logistics, and support to include, their bail fund, all of that stuff. So, and you find the same Ford Foundation. Soros is just the latest version of the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie, the Ford Foundation that has been used throughout history to facilitate CIA operations. George Soros, as much as everybody likes to fixate on him, he is just the latest version of an ongoing foundation support of Gladio operations. He just happens to be the one right now while we're living. but he's not the only one. He is running, he's almost kind of like running cover for the older foundations that have been doing this for over a generation.
I mean, all those photos of Alex Soros, of Alex Soros posting this, of him standing with all these other politicians,
Yeah.
it's almost like their own signaling mechanism of, like, you know, who to defend. You know, who is Soros standing with? Who,
Yep.
you know, when the Republicans go after somebody, who do we have to provide air cover for? I wonder if those photos are already being used, you know, against people politically. But I mean, they're leaving behind a lot of breadcrumbs. Probably they don't intend to do it. This is probably just the way they've always done it. But I don't think they realize that the public is getting wise to the whole thing, and they're just used to, you know, trying to control things. They have this lever in front of them, and they're yanking harder and harder and harder on it without realizing that they're actually, you know, yanking on that lever at this point used to help them. Now it's hurting them.
Yeah. Or they're just doing that so that grabs your attention so you don't look at the old money.
That's obviously the big question, Colonel, right? like you and I had this conversation a couple weeks ago a week ago. We know that this goes back to the CIA. We know that there's links, you know, within NATO intelligence and everything. It's basically the same system and the, you know, criminal syndicate.
And the destabilization exercises.
The question is, and we know it goes back before the CIA, back to Sullivan and Cromwell, back to 80 Wall Street, back to the Fabian, back to Lord Milner, the Fabian Society, Round Table Groups, Cecil Rhodes. If you can trace it back to, you know, the Opium Wars, or, you know, God forbid, back to ancient Rome somehow, you can get a broader swath of the network and try to figure out, you know, who Mr. Big really is.
Right.
Who's, you know, is Soros the last guy behind this, or are there puppet strings leading back further?
Well, we all obviously know there's a lot of puppet strings leading back further. Whether we ever get to the end of the international syndicate and name all of the players, I don't know if that's within the scope of anything that they're opting to do. But we all know in our group that Soros is just the latest iteration of what has gone on for a very long time. So
absolutely, yeah. You have. I mean, it used to be. I mean, if this had happened in the 1970s, like, you know, the prime suspects would have been Nelson and David Rockefeller.
Yeah. The Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation. Yeah.
So, I mean, this has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And we may be able to kind of bring an end to it, but I'm just worried that there's still one, you know, or two levels up from Soros.
Well, they're definitely.
This still goes back to the Rockefellers, I'll bet. And
I agree, but if you use Soros for the same reason they're using him, to cut all of the foundations, cut off the university systems, cut off everything by using Soros as the boogeyman, I'm fine with that. Because if you neuter the entire thing process-wise, you neuter them in the process as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And at some point, if they don't have the money to keep the whole thing going and they lose the ability to retaliate, the truth will begin to leak out. But what I'm worried about is it's going to sort of be this vague truth passed down, you know, through oral folklore rather than, established as facts in the history textbooks.
Right.
What I'm worried about is we'll hear oral folklore about lynchings from the 1800s, but that didn't get reported in, the newspapers. That was stuff that families had to remember, and, they had to kind of, figure out ways to prove it. There's, what happened to a lot of Jews during, the Holocaust. There's not a lot of written documentation on some of that stuff. My hope is that we find a way to prove it, and that we can document it, and we can get it into a history textbook.
I agree.
And tell our kids this happened.
I agree. But I do think that if you take down all of the enabling mechanisms, in doing that, it will reveal itself by default. So if you no longer have corrupt control of the medical journal and study, the research elements of that, because they're all neutered, and the new stuff starts coming out, that's going to beg the question, well, why didn't, just like what I said, if we've known since 2008 there's a correlation between Tylenol, why is it you know what I mean? So people will naturally go back and start doing, the people who like to do research, and write history books are going to go back and do that work. It may take a while, but I actually think it's going to be done. But I think if you only have 4 years, the most important thing to do is not worry about how the history books are going to get written. The most important thing to do is get the neutering done, and let the people that are experts at that documentation go back, and they can pull all of those strings together. And maybe the legacy of all of this is, once the strings are cut, and the control mechanisms disabled that wouldn't allow accurate history, because it's out there. We found it. We found all of this information about Operation Gladio that was hidden from us. So a diligent researcher can find that and document it, especially if all of the secrets of the CIA and FBI are released as they say they're going to. The stones will be there for us to make the mosaic.
This has happened in the past. Like, I think during I watched the Citizens Commission on 9/11 about 6 months ago, but I think it was Barry Zwikert who basically referenced historical examples of this, like Guy Fawkes. Everybody celebrates Guy Fawkes Day. This guy who tried to commit treason against the king and blow up Parliament. It turned out that later that was all orchestrated. And I think reading this as a kid, you understand what the history textbook is saying happened here, but that it has to take something like this for you to get it
right.
On the Tylenol thing, which I just find it hysterical. Dr. Vin Gupta, who is the MSNBC doctor, he's coming out, arguing that Tylenol use is safe in pregnancy. Don't listen to the utter nonsense coming out of the FDA and CDC, and speak to your medical provider. And I'm just looking at all this. I'm wondering, how much advertising revenue does MSNBC get from Johnson & Johnson, and how much? I wonder, if Dr. Vin Gupta has any deals going on with the big pharma on it too. So, I think he's saying this because he has to. He has to get people to believe that. I mean, if suddenly Tylenol is unsafe, the entire media apparatus loses all of its credibility, especially, the TV doctors.
And what's weird is it's not suddenly. like I said, I researched that the first they named 46 studies today. I went back and looked when the first one was written. The first one was written in 2008, and it was never publicly um, made as a news item. It was basically ignored. And there's the latest one was done in the middle of 2024, which is the one they were citing. And again, that one that they did in the summer of 2000, maybe late summer 2024, actually contains in it the other 46. And I just went through them to see when the earliest one, and I found 2008, and it looked to me like the earliest one. So this is a body of information. They're not like, oh, we found this one study and it said this. There's been 46 studies since 2008. And all of them shows this linkage, especially the one in 2024 went a little bit further and said the combination, because when you go get a shot and a vaccine and your child runs a slight fever, they tell you to take Tylenol. That's actually a problem because of the way the baby's body reacts to the shot. It goes into some, I don't know, it's all scientific gobbledygook to me, but it makes the body's
anaphylactic shock.
Well, it didn't use that word, but it depresses a bunch of symptoms in or capability of the baby's body from the vaccine, and by dosing them with Tylenol and its potential injurious effects is like the deadly combination, the two of those things. So it exacerbates what may have been fine with just one or the other. It makes it even worse. And so, and again, that the 2024 was not the only study that found that, but it was the one that articulated it the best for me, as far as the ease of understanding it. So I just, it's just hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that there's an entire body of people that have known this over the course of the last, 15 years, almost 20 years. And almost every doctor has marched lockstep in line with this mantra. Even though study after study, like I said, a whole bunch of studies has shown that there's a linkage there. It's dumbfounding to me.
It takes a lot of bravery to come out, though, and it's not like we're talking about some antibiotic that gets prescribed 3,000 times a year. This is Tylenol. It might not, like, maybe omeprazole, or
but like they said, Tylenol is fine for adults. Although I did notice that most other countries don't produce it in the same magnitude that we do here. It's in much lower dosage, even the over-the-counter, normal Tylenol. But to me,
I mean, after allergy medicine and a couple of others, this has to be one of the most widely.
But it's fine for adults. But it's fine for adults. Yeah. It's fine for guys. It's fine for women. They do suggest lower dosage than what's authorized in the United States. But if you go to Europe, the over-the-counter stuff is in much lower dosages. But they're not saying it's bad. They're saying don't give it to babies and don't give it to pregnant women. And you'd have thought that was a nuclear bomb.
Since the 1970s, though, they've been telling everybody that this is the safest thing to give your kids because they're worried about giving people, kids aspirin. Because I mean, you like, the one rule is never give aspirin to babies. And I forget exactly. It causes this syndrome. It turns out apparently that maybe you shouldn't give Tylenol to kids either. That's scary information that takes real courage as a researcher or as, a medical authority.
That's your fucking job.
That change.
It's their job.
It is.
If you can't do the job and you don't have the courage, get out of the career field. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. If you are afraid to publish the results of a research project that you're doing, and you run a medical journal and you're afraid to do that, you have no business in that job. So
That's true. Well, researchers need to come out and they need to say what they're observing.
Well, evidently, 40 some of them
in a position who's willing to make that call, which is a really hard call to make.
40 some of them did, and they were ignored by the entire infrastructure of the federal government. That's the scary part. So, those researchers that published those things probably never got another thing funded.
Right. Ignored, ostracized, gone after.
Yeah.
By the IRS, gone after by the FBI, planted things on there. I mean, when they went against pharma, look at it. Historically, we've seen so many cases.
Yeah.
Where people rose up and tried to go against Fauci. And look what happened to them.
Yeah, some of them were unalived.
Right. Disappeared.
Yeah.
I mean, we have precedent for this with the leaded fuel, too. I mean, there was a scare in the 1920s about, putting lead in the gasoline. And then these researchers come out in the 70s and basically say that, we're I think it finally, the alarmism, reached a crescendo in 1980, talking about how to deal with leaded fuels. And one researcher basically came out and said that due to leaded fuels, cities might be uninhabitable because of what we did. And it was just, all these different disparate findings, but they tried to suppress some of the research in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s that, leaded, ethyl lead, could cause, issues in big cities.
Yeah. Well, now that we know that they lied to us, the very first thing I do when I look at a study is to go find out who funded it. Because generally speaking, it's going to be the people that are going to get rich off of the particular findings. And if the answer to the research project isn't what they want to hear, then they just don't publish the results. So you really have to, in looking at that, like when I did that research project on fluoride, my mind was blown. The entire thing was a scam from the people that the studies that they used as early as the 1930s were all funded by Carnegie and Kaiser at their respective universities. And what business were they in? They were in the business that the byproduct was fluoride. And the people in the local areas where they were doing business were being exposed to higher levels of fluoride and having the damage it caused by it. And so they just decided that if we distribute it to everybody, then no one's going to be able to point a finger at us because everybody's going to have it. And then Kaiser went right out and set up the world's largest hospital system, Kaiser Permanente, because he knew everybody was going to get sick. I mean, these people are that evil. So it's crazy. The whole thing's crazy. We've been lied to about everything. That's the end of the program. We've literally been lied to about everything. All right, I'm gonna run. Great conversation. Okay, we'll be back tomorrow at 4:00. I'll try to pay more attention and get back to my computer at 4. You guys take care. See you guys later.